Welcome back to the France 24 debate. We're looking at the resumption of talks in the Middle East, and we have Israelis and Palestinians around the table here in the France 24 studios to perhaps work out the way ahead. Maybe we should call it the France 24 Peace Talks, who knows? A debate then which could perhaps have far-reaching results, if we're lucky. Our guests, just to remind you, Ziad Klo, a Franco-Palestinian lawyer. Good to see you, sir. Former legal advisor to the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Gil Mehali, columnist for the Yediot Aharonot, Israel's top-selling newspaper. Good to see you, sir. The founder as well of Causa.fr. We have on the other side of our studio Sari Khoury, who is the Palestinian activist and architect by profession. Good to see you, sir. And next to him, Ron Soffer, lawyer at the Paris bar and at the bar in New York. How you practicing both at the same time is beyond me, but you're a better man than I am, clearly.
I'm also a member of the Israel Bar Association.
Well, there you go. That's the caliber of guests that we have here. That's the caliber of guests we have here at France 24. Joining us on the line from London, Jonathan Paris, the Middle East analyst and senior fellow at the Atlantic Council of the United States. Thank you, sir, for bearing with us. We are going to get this second half underway by talking to a man who perhaps has seen it all and done it all before, Avi Pazner, veteran spokesman for the Israeli government, joining us by phone. Mr. Pazner, thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much.
Can I put to you, it's one question, one answer, then you're free to continue your holiday. Do you think we're in a position where this 9-month deadline can be hit, where these talks can work?
Yeah, I think they can. I mean, we certainly have to work in the hope that they can. As you know, we've been trying now for 20 years to get an agreement between Israelis and Palestinians. We had Oslo, which was an agreement which was signed and carried out. Then we had an attempt in 2000 at Camp David between Barak and Arafat, which failed. We had another attempt by Ehud Olmert and Mahmoud Abbas 4 or 5 years ago in 2008, which also failed. But those agreements clearly underline the fact that there is a desire by the parties to reach an agreement with all the difficulties and all the mistrust and all the historical problem and religious problem and political problem and security. There is, I think, a common ground, and the common ground is that both sides want to create two states, a Jewish Israeli state and the Palestinian state, living side by side peacefully. So it might not be easy, and maybe it will take more than 9 months. 9 months is a very ambitious target, but I just can tell you that from our part, from the part of the Israeli government, we'll do all what is possible in order to reach such an agreement.
Mr. Pazner, thank you very much for joining us. Avi Pazner there, the, I think it's fair to say, veteran spokesman for the Israeli government, a person who's seen these things before. Thank you, sir, for joining us, and thanks for sharing your analysis of the situation. Avi Pazner, it seems, optimistic. Do you share that optimism, Ziad?
No, I mean, for many reasons, but this probably, a very important one, which has not been mentioned yet, is the fact that, it's not only about reaching a peace agreement. As said earlier, many agreements were signed, there were many attempts that failed. It's about being able to implement it. And for these type of agreements, we're talking about a 10 or 15 years time period within which you're going to be able, to on the ground act and in a way or another be able to implement what is going to be agreed upon if this ever happens by the Israelis and the Palestinians. In my view today, 20 years after the start of the Oslo process, we're in a radical different situation on the ground. These negotiations started 20 years ago when there were only a few tens of thousands of settlers in the West Bank. Now there are more than 500,000. So if you want to reach a deal on the basis of on the two-state solution basis, this will mean that you will have to swap land, to transfer people. This will create tensions. And what people forget is that, from time to time, agreeing on something or trying to act on the ground can actually make the situation even worse than it already is.
As you were talking, a tweet came in on that very issue about the settlements. Don't expect a serious peace process if Israel's still running illegal settlements in the West Bank. That's via Twitter. Ron, what do you do about the settlements?
Well, I think that contrary to what was said before, I don't think that President Obama was outmaneuvered by Israeli diplomacy. President Obama recognized that he made a mistake in his first term by concentrating on this settlement issue, and provided the Palestinian.
It is a big issue, though, isn't it?
Provided the
It is a big
Palestinian an
issue.
excuse to not talk for the last 3 years. I think that the settlements are there. It will have to be dealt with, and this is part of this is what will have to be negotiated. If you take, for example, UN Resolution 242, which talks about creating permanent and secure borders, it does not talk about Israel withdrawing from all the territories. It talks about withdrawing from territories. The word "the" was deleted from the resolution. So this will have to be negotiated and taken into account. There are hundreds of thousands of Israeli citizens in the West Bank, and there's nothing that anyone can do about it right now.
Let me bring in Jonathan Paris. I'll come to you. Go on. Go ahead quickly. Go on.
I just want to say I'm glad to hear an Israeli also emphasize the visible reality that basically says we're creating a new reality on the ground, and it's here to stay, and it really advances our position as we negotiate. So he says we create a new reality, and you have to deal with it. So,
But we'll deal with it.
glad to hear it clearly.
I'm hearing the
It
tone.
might take a bit of time.
I'm
but
hearing the
it will
undertone
happen.
too. Let me bring in Jonathan Paris to get his take on the situation. Jonathan, is the settlement issue something that the Palestinians have to get over, simply?
Well, I think the settlement is going to be a very tough issue, but I think through swaps, most of the settlers will be deemed to be on the Israeli side of the line. But let me make a couple points that came out in the recent remarks. First of all, what's changed now than before is that the Arab-Israeli conflict is not the main hot conflict anymore. It's a Sunni-Shia conflict that's grabbing the region. You've got Syria, Egypt, all these countries in turmoil. All the enemies of Israel and Palestinian peacemaking are in turmoil. Hezbollah, Iran, they're all fighting in Syria right now. What an opportune time for the Israelis and the Palestinians to start talking. Second of all, Bibi Netanyahu's been talking about a binational state not working. That's leftist talk. Bibi Netanyahu's talking about a referendum. That's a way to get around his own pro-settler coalition. If the Israeli public buys what comes out of this 9 months of negotiation, a referendum will support a peace agreement. Finally, as I said earlier, the Palestinian Authority has a really opportunity here now that Hamas has lost their Syrian patron, they've lost their Iran patronage, they've split with Hezbollah, and now Egypt has turned against them. They are alone right now. They cannot do that much damage. And finally, on the right of return, which I think is the issue that Israel and the Palestinians will have to work out, even Jimmy Carter, who's no friend of Israel, said, and I read in today's paper, said that at most a dozen Palestinians will go back to the pre-1967 borders, that is, to the Israel proper. That, from Jimmy Carter, suggests that maybe there'll be some reality on the right of return Palestinians.
Jonathan Paris, thank you very much indeed. Gumi Haile, can I bring you in, because you were speaking in the first half of this programme about redrawing the atlases, about redrawing the whole map of the Middle East, which is now disintegrated, you were saying. And this is one of the issues, isn't it? All the other aspects that have happened around have maybe completely redefined the situation.
I think we need a new paradigm to redraw the whole thing. And as for the settlements, I think that more than 20 years ago was the Oslo Agreement. It started 22 or even more years ago. What was already achieved, and I think Ziad knows even better than I do, there was a kind of agreement on the swaps, the land swaps, and the fact that in principle and within a definitive agreement, certain groups of settlements could be annexed by Israel, which will solve the problem of a majority of the actual settlers in the West Bank. I remind you that Israel evacuated all settlers in Gaza and before in Sinai. It's difficult, but it was done before. I don't think it's going to be easy. I think that the settlers will be very violent, and I think what we saw a few years ago in Gaza will be only a prelude to something a lot bigger. But it's been done before, and it's possible. I I am less optimistic. I'm less optimistic on the capability of the Palestinian society and the Israeli society today to accept what could be a reasonable agreement in the current situation.
Ziad?
Yes, I think that, as Gil said actually earlier, I mean, one should not forget the broader picture. I mean, it's a totally different situation now with, the Arab awakening. Why? Because, finally now people will have to cope with the Arab people, Arab citizens. What are all these people saying in the streets, demonstrating? They are saying, El Shab Yurid, which means people want. What does that mean? It means that now people have to listen to the will, of the people. And it means that, one way or another, they're defining the political agenda. Look at what is happening in Egypt. Political forces, by political forces, established political forces, governments, whether that be, the Egyptian government, the Israeli government, Western governments, only react to what is happening on the ground. And I don't see why there wouldn't be any difference in Palestine. Again, as was said, a bit earlier, we're experiencing historical times, very likely that, that in 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 20 years from now, I'm not sure when exactly the borders will be different in this region. Maybe the Kurds will get a state before the Palestinians. Maybe there will be a federation between the Palestinians, the Israelis, and the Jordanians. One can think of many different options, but I don't think that you can define that future without the people. And at this very moment, the Palestinian people, again, are not represented. They're not consulted by the Palestinian Authority whenever they want to resume the peace talks. And again, there is no accountability. This is obviously very, very problematic.
Ron, this must go counter to what you're thinking.
Well, I think that when I hear Tzipi Livni say that this is not about the past, this past is a substantial part of it, whether she likes it or not. And for example, one of the reasons why I'm not optimistic is because the Jordanians are not part of this process. Jordan sits on what is about 2/3 of historic Palestine, and most of the Jordanian population is Palestinian, and they should be part of these negotiations and maybe part of the solution, because there isn't enough space in the West Bank to create another state.
I think today 20% of the Jordanian population is Syrian.
And so it is about the past, and it's not by making these kinds of slogans that a solution will be found.
Indeed, the refugee crisis spilling over from the Syrian conflict, of course, having an impact all around. This is one of the issues. Obviously, you can talk Jerusalem, borders, security, settlements, refugees. I wrote those little crib lists down for the issues that are trying to be sorted out. But fundamentally, doesn't it boil down to whether people can live together? The conflict I grew up with in the north of England was over the water in Ireland. There were Catholics and Protestants, and there were deaths, and there were bombings near where I lived, and then I grew up, became a journalist, and reported on things like that. And you see people affected and lives torn apart. And this is what you've seen all the time, isn't it? Can people live together? Can people put all that behind them? Can they actually move things together?
I think it is possible, because I remember where people could move freely in the West Bank from 1967 until the first Intifada, and even afterwards. Palestinians and Israelis cooperated economically, and there was freedom of movement, and things changed after a while, but Israelis and Palestinians have proven that they can live together in peace. The question is, will the politicians be able to do it? One of the problems is it's not a problem, it's democracy. Israeli governments change. And the process is just too long and usually cannot be concluded by one Israeli government.
We'll pick this up in a second. Let's have a brief pause and bring in James Creedon. James Creedon, of course, who keeps an eye on all media developments here at France 24, a regular contributor to all our programmes. James, I know you've been looking at what's been happening online and what people have been saying. Give us a taster of what this issue is making for you.
Evening, Mark. Look at some of the articles in the French press that are picking up on some of the maybe scepticism that has been expressed about these peace talks.
Well, Israel, some scepticism here too, haven't we?
Right. Israel, Palestine, the negotiations for peace. Do they have a chance for success? That's an article in L'Express News Weekly online. And essentially what they're saying is this 9-month period that has been sort of informally declared by the US Department of State for these talks. It is an informal duration. And that is something that is causing a worry for the Palestinian side, who feel that a real time duration should be chosen to work with, because
so
it's
9
a
months
little
is
bit
arbitrary.
Exactly. This actually on the Huffington Post website takes headlines from over the past 20 years, essentially going back to 1993. Might be difficult to see there, but extracts and dates from the 7th of December 2010, for example, various different attempts at peace talks, giving a sense, I suppose, at how long this process has been going on, and with varying degrees of success or lack of success.
I think as
right?
people here were saying, we've been here before, we've seen these things happen. It hasn't necessarily been successful as we have seen. Yeah.
That's right. And this is in Courrier International, which, as you know, Mark, takes the international press, and they've taken a look at the Palestinian newspaper Al Hayat Al Jadida, and they're headlining here on the fact that there is no settlement freeze during these talks, and that was a condition stated by Barack Obama at the beginning of his mandate, or a request at least. It was also a condition of the Palestinians, and it seems now that this is not being
President Abbas has repeated that many times, yeah.
But yet it's not going to be the case this time around, it seems. This article, also in the Huffington Post, is pointing to some doubts on the Israeli side. We've been hearing as well about these prisoner releases, and they refer to one Jewish newspaper, or Israeli newspaper rather, Jediat Aharonot, hope I'm pronouncing that correctly.
We have the man right here.
The assassins are to be freed. That was their headline regarding that. Some of these prisoners held since before the Oslo Accords in 1993, and a lot of concern, it seems, in Israel about people that Israelis perceive as murderers, etc., being welcomed as heroes in the streets of Jenin, Ramallah and Hebron.
Okay, James, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks,
James
Mark.
Creedon there. Gil, can I get you to pick up on that one clearly, because your paper was quoted, the assassins. I mean, that is basically just writing for your public, isn't it? Well,
yes,
it is,
but it's a very passionate question, but it's not a major strategic issue. This is not the major problem. I can understand and sympathize with families of people who were murdered, and they see the people who killed them leaving the jail. I can understand that. But I don't. I can understand I can also understand the political logic behind the decision, but I don't think that this is one of the. It's not an important obstacle.
Would you agree from the Palestinian front?
I can't get out of the idea that what Kerry is saying. Actually, he says, it's one of the lesser of the two evils. Basically, if we don't negotiate, it's much worse. Negotiating is less sort of dangerous than not negotiating at all. So we have to do something to move the situation. And then they really frame it all in the changes that are happening right now in the region, in the Arab Spring, and not on the basis of anything that has any direct relation to an oppressed population, an oppressed nation for the past 60 years or so who have been living under occupation. It's really just, it's not treated as a cause. This occupation is ignored to the side. But it is the cause. And then you mention, of course, all the changes that are happening in the Arab world. But this is also a very important cause for the Arab nation. So why can't it be framed also in a way to treat it with its very large symbolic weight for the whole region?
It's a good way of putting it, but obviously if you look at the change in the whole region, though, if in some places it hasn't been that positive. Sorry, Ron, go ahead.
I think that the peace movement in Israel has been very seriously hurt by the missiles coming on Israeli cities from Gaza, and also in 2006 from Lebanon. And it seemed to many Israelis that every time the Israeli army evacuates an area, it becomes a launching pad for missiles on its cities. And the peace movement in Israel and people who supported the peace movement has been seriously hurt by these missiles. By also requiring the liberation of people who have been convicted of murdering civilians, women and children, that's not going to get the Israeli population on the side of an agreement.
That is a very important point to mention. But as there has been evacuation of settlers in Gaza, the majority of them have been put in the West Bank as well. So is that a solution of a problem?
That's not
really
true.
No, there were 8,000 settlers. There were 8,000 settlers in Gaza, which indeed were evacuated. But in the meantime, basically since the Gaza withdrawal, nearly 100,000 settlers indeed established residence in the West Bank. And as we know historically, politically, religiously, the West Bank is much more important to the Israelis than the Gaza, which has no meaning whatsoever. I think it's important because, we can talk about this negotiation for days and, they've not achieved anything positive in my view in the most recent years. But there's a movement, a grassroots movement on the Palestinian side that is achieving results and which is, which now has a growing influence. It's the boycott, disinvestment and sanction movement. And I'm convinced that one of the reasons why we're back today at the negotiation table is also because Palestinians realize that they have alternatives to put an end to what some author, an American Jewish author actually characterizes as the crisis of Zionism. When Zionism today, the state of Israel, realizes that it cannot remain at the same time Jewish and democratic. Why? Because now the borders of this country have expanded to the West Bank, and now the Israelis, through the Palestinian Authority, hold responsibility for the Palestinian population that is on the West Bank. So the Israelis have to make a choice, and they'll be trying to force a peace deal with the Palestinians to have them agree to something that might look like a state, but which in fact will not be, because it won't have the attributes of a state. So this is what is probably at stake today. So forget about official politics and so forth. I think that on the ground there's a growing pressure internationally as well. There's much more pressure being put on artists which are going to Israel. There's a very important decision at a governmental level that was taken by the EU. There's a directive that was passed a few days ago, which says from now on, no cooperation agreement will be signed with the Israelis unless it is expressly stipulated in the agreement that the West Bank and Gaza, basically Palestinian occupied territories, that they are not part of this agreement.
This is one of the agreements that means that, say, students who are going to universities don't get their funding, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
boycotts do not work. The Arabs have tried for 60 years the Arab boycott.
Well, you should ask the South Africans
of bringing
their views on that statement.
Well, I don't think that you can say that Israel is an apartheid country. I mean, the way Palestinians are trying to say, but it's because it's not. Israel is a democratic country. Israel is a democratic country.
Different Israeli officials said it in the past. In 2008, actually, at the beginning of the Annapolis process to which I participated, the Israeli Prime Minister at that time stated publicly, if we don't reach a peace deal by the end of that year, the year 2008, if there is no Palestinian state by the end of that year, Israel will face a situation of apartheid.
But that's what they've been saying. That's what they've been saying. That's what they've been saying for years. That's what they've been saying for years. But every 4 years, every 4 years, Israel holds elections. Every 4 years, Israel holds elections, and the Arab-Israeli citizens vote. And Israel is a democratic society, and this threat that Israel will one day have to resort to being an apartheid state has not happened for the past decades, and probably will never happen.
Thanks, Ron. Go ahead, Gil.
It's a fact that the Israeli government is concerned with the erosion of the status of Israel in Europe, and it is also concerned by what is going on in certain circles in the United States. And I don't think it was a mere coincidence that a few days ago a very senior American officer said again that Israel becomes a liability. And I know that in the United States they are not a majority, and Israel has a strong position, but it's not without threats. And I know also that for Netanyahu this is a very major concern. And as Ziad said earlier, and rightly so, when you negotiate, you need leverage, and the only things that the Palestinians can bargain today is this pressure, which is we shouldn't exaggerate the importance of it, but we shouldn't do the contrary either. It's painful, and the Israeli government is taking it very seriously.
Well, in the final 30 seconds, let's quickly go around the table. Sorry, in 9 months will we meet again and have some solutions?
I think 9 months is not a contractual agreement. They want to start the discussions, but
Ron?
it means nothing.
I think we'll be back here having the same discussion 9 months from now.
Okay, but hopefully we were in different clothes. That could be quite embarrassing. Ziad, what do you think?
No, I just think, Prime Minister Netanyahu actually said a couple of days ago, I mean, for the Israelis, it's a vital interest to negotiate, but maybe not to reach an agreement.
Gil, I'll skip you because you've just spoken. Let's bring in Jonathan for a final word from London. Jonathan, in 9 months, where will we be, do you think?
We'll have a handshake at the White House.
Handshake at the White House. Thank you, sir, for joining us. Jonathan Barris there from the Atlantic Council of the United States Middle East analyst. Thank you, sir, for being with us. Thank you for waiting with us, and thank you for patiently waiting. And thank you to our guests here in the studio. I don't know what we solved or what we resolved, but we discussed it for an hour here on France 24. The situation between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and the talks restarted. And of course, we'll report on every step of the way here for you here on France 24. Stay with us. Thank you all very much indeed.